Mr. Speaker, on behalf of Lakeland, I oppose Bill C-69, which will have wide-ranging, significant impacts on Canada's oil and gas, nuclear and mining sectors, and by extension on every other sector in the country. Bill C-69 doesn't involve minor tweaks. It's a major overhaul of multiple laws and regulations related to Canada's assessment processes, and it will damage Canada's capacity to attract investment that benefits everyone. Canada is a resource-based economy and is a world leader on responsible resource development. Those facts are among Canada's greatest strengths and contributions to the world. Canada's exploration and mining sector is a major driver of the economy. In 2016, it contributed $60.3 billion directly to Canada's GDP, 19% of Canada's total domestic exports worth $92 billion, and the employment of nearly 600,000 Canadians. As a sector, it's the largest private employer of Indigenous people in Canada, often where jobs and opportunities are scarce in remote and northern regions. At the end of 2015, the value of Canadian mining assets at home and abroad totaled $171 billion across 102 countries, from remote and Indigenous communities to large cities across Canada and the Toronto Stock Exchange. The mining sector generates significant economic and social benefits for Canadians. Of course, the oil and gas sector is also a key generator of middle-class jobs and Canada's high standard of living. The International Energy Agency projects global oil demand will continue to grow, with oil maintaining the largest share of any energy fuel source in the global energy market for decades. The average energy demand is predicted to increase approximately 30% by 2040. And for context, that's the equivalent of adding another China or India, the most populous countries in the world, to the current level of global energy consumption. Canada is home to the third largest oil reserves in the world, with recoverable reserves of 171 billion barrels. And Canada is the fifth largest producer of natural gas and has the 19th largest proven natural gas reserves in the world, enough to supply consumers with natural gas for more than 300 years. The Canadian Energy Research Institute says every job in Canadian upstream oil and gas creates 2 indirect and 3 induced jobs in other sectors across the country. Scholar Kevin Milligan notes that without income derived from the resource boom, Canadian inequality and the well-being of Canada's middle class would be much worse. The Liberals talk a big game about making life better for middle-class Canadians, but in fact, this Prime Minister has turned his back on the hard-working men and women who have given so much to our country through responsible resource development. Last year, the Prime Minister talked about phasing out the oil sands, and a couple of months ago, he told the world he regrets Canada can't get off oil, quote, tomorrow. And the cumulative impacts of the Liberal-caused uncertainty and their imposition of layers of costs and red tape is driving investment out of Canada. The Liberals have imposed a carbon tax on everything, something that major oil and gas producers aren't imposing on themselves around the world, and anti-energy legislation and policies like removing the tax credit for new exploratory oil and gas well drilling last year, at a time when more than 100,000 energy workers had lost their jobs after this Prime Minister chased more energy investment out of Canada than in any other 2-year period in 70 years, more than half a century. The Liberals killed the nation-building Energy East pipeline with last-minute rule changes and a double standard of upstream and downstream emissions assessments that they are now formally imposing on all pipeline reviews in C-69. And the Liberals outright vetoed the already approved Northern Gateway pipeline. Both of those were the only actual new standalone proposals for exports to markets other than the U.S. in recent history. They're forcing a tanker ban on BC's northern coast, which is really just a ban on the oil sands and on pipelines, and they've imposed an offshore drilling ban in the north. Even before C-69 has been implemented, the Montreal Economic Institute says, quote, the message being conveyed to investors is, don't come here to do business. Even if you fulfill all regulatory requirements, you'll still face many obstacles. And that's exactly what happened to the Trans Mountain expansion because of the Liberals' failures. And the Prime Minister's response was to pay $14.5 billion tax dollars for Kinder Morgan to take their $7.4 billion private investment plans out of Canada. It's clear this Prime Minister's anti-energy policies are chasing energy investment away at historic rates. Yep. And now the Liberals are piling on even more regulatory uncertainty for investors in Bill C-69. The Canadian Energy Pipeline Association said, quote, if the goal is to curtail oil and gas production and to have no more pipelines built, this legislation may have hit the mark. In a recent letter to Alberta MLA Prasad Panda, several associations directly impacted by Bill C-69 outlined the following criteria essential to attract investment to Canada. Quote, certainty in regulations in order to plan capital investments of large magnitudes and reach final investment decisions in Canada's favour. Permanence, because if programs or policies are temporary or have an expiry date, they will be deemed too high risk to factor into capital planning life cycles, which span approximately 6 to 8 years. Certainty in the form of timelines. Performance-based policies, ensuring benefits to communities by tying incentives to performance-based measures such as job creation, research and development, innovation, and capital investment. These criteria were hallmarks of Canada's regulatory framework for decades, with the most rigorous assessment, comprehensive consultation, highest standards, and strongest environmental protections in the world. A 2016 Worley-Parsons study echoes conclusions of a 2014 benchmarking analysis of Canada against the top major oil and gas producing jurisdictions in the world. It confirmed, quote, Canada is a global leader in environment, Aboriginal relations, and governance of resource use, with state-of-the-art processes, practices, and legislation. Canada is recognized internationally as a nation that has contributed significantly to the development and advancement of regional and strategic environmental assessment since the introduction of the Canadian Directive in 1990, requiring federal departments and agencies to consider environmental concerns at the strategic level of policies, plans, and programs. But every time the Liberals attack the last 10 years of Canada's energy and environmental assessment and evaluation for politics, trying to keep the NDP and Green voters who helped them win in 2015, they empower foreign and domestic anti-Canadian energy activists who are fighting to shut down Canadian resources. It's becoming a crisis, and this debate is a critical policy question for the future of our country. Canada must be able to compete. Of the top 10 most attractive jurisdictions for oil and gas investment, 6 U.S. states rank at the top 10 global jurisdictions: Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, West Virginia, Kansas, and Wyoming. According to a 2017 World Bank report, Canada ranked 34 out of 35 OECD countries in the time required to obtain a permit for a new general construction project. There are real impacts of falling behind in competitiveness. In committee, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers said, quote, Canada is attracting more uncertainty, not more capital, and we will continue to lose investment and jobs if we do not have a system of clear rules and decisions that are final and can be relied upon. Unfortunately, CAP and the investment community today see very little in Bill C-69 that will improve that status. Suncor said, quote, the competitiveness improvements that we're achieving as an industry through ongoing innovation are being largely negated by the continuously increasing cost of new regulations. Paul Tepsich, founder of High Rock Capital Management, Inc., said, quote, I'm not crazy about Canada. We've got taxes going up and regulations going up. In committee, the president and CEO of the Mining Association of Canada said, quote, proponents making billion-dollar investments need to know what the rules are and how they will be implemented. You can't have this certainty knowing that rules may change midstream in some way. And the Liberals have already caused a regulatory vacuum for major resource developers since January 2016, and they've exacerbated uncertainty for investors and for workers. With Bill C-69, the Liberals might as well hang a sign in the window that says Canada is not open for business. It's clear timelines and requirements and predictable rules and responsibilities that provide certainty. The Liberals claim C-69 implements short and clear timelines for reviews, but that's not true. The planning phase, during which the Impact Assessment Agency will determine whether a project is in the public interest, for which C-69 sets some guidelines but leaves wide arbitrary discretion for the minister to define, adds an extra 180 days, which can be extended by 60 days by 90 days at the request of the minister or Governor and Council. And that's before a project can even get approved to start an impact assessment. Bill C-69 also does not establish criteria that a project must meet or what constitutes a complete application for it to be granted an assessment in the first place. The bill has been amended so that the minister no longer has the power to veto a project before it can move on to the impact assessment stage, which I support. But under paragraph 17.1, the minister can still interject opinions about the potential environmental impacts of a project, which may or may not influence the Impact Assessment Agency's decision to review. So much for objective, independent, expert-based decisions. And even after the Liberals pass C-69, the parameters of the project list won't even be revealed to the public until fall, and regulations won't be fully implemented until 2019. So when the Liberals ram through this bill, there will still be ongoing uncertainty for potential proponents of long-term, capital-intensive, multi-billion-dollar major resource projects following almost 3 years of the same. But if a project is granted an assessment, then there's still no concrete timelines in C-69. Section 37.6 states, quote, the minister may suspend the time limit within which the review panel must submit the report until any activity that is prescribed by regulations made under paragraph 112C is completed. So Bill C-69 allows the assessment to be stopped and started and for timelines to be extended indefinitely. Obviously, yet more uncertainty for potential proponents and investors. In committee, the Director of Environmental Services at Nova Scotia Power, Terry Toner, stated, quote, while the timelines in the bill provide some guidance for project proponents, the government's goal of process predictability is significantly diluted by provisions in the acts that permit limitless extensions and suspensions. Time is of critical value, and it can make the difference between a project built and a project abandoned. We accept that there must be some flexibility, but there must also be discipline and transparency in order to ensure investor confidence in Canadian infrastructure projects. In committee, the President and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission stated, quote, it is important that we all know from the get-go the length of time to get project approval. From our experience, industry can accept a quick yes or no decision. What is unreasonable is to get to a maybe. And unfortunately, C-69 is ripe for a swath of maybes on project applications because of the potential for suspensions, delays, and uncertainty about measures for applications and outcomes. Clearly, C-69 won't deliver on discipline and transparency in all aspects of the assessment of major resource projects. According to paragraph 183.5 in part 2 of the bill, the regulator may exclude any period of time from the time limit calculation so long as reasons are provided. If resource development proponents have the choice between multiple maybes over years of review in Canada or a timely yes south of the border, where do the Liberals think their investments will go? Unfortunately, the answer is already obvious in the flight of investment capital from Canada, with U.S. investment in Canada falling by nearly half and Canadian investment in the U.S. up 2/3. And while the Liberals claim Bill C-69 will streamline and clarify the approval of major federal resource projects, its requirements create confusion and unanswered questions. For example, Bill C-69 mandates that proponents must demonstrate, quote, health, social, and economic effects, including with respect to the intersection of sex and gender with other identity factors. Obviously, job creation, research and development, innovation, and capital investment from resource development reduce poverty, benefit the economy, and provide revenue for governments and public services like health, education, and social services, and funds for academic and charitable organizations. But I think proponents can be forgiven for uncertainty around how their investments and initiatives relate to identity factors. And it's rich for the Liberals to argue C-69 enhances scientific evidence in reviews beyond what has already been done in Canada's regulatory system. In fact, during committee, Mr. Martin Olszynski of the University of Calgary pointed out the terms science or scientific are only mentioned 5 times in all the 400 pages of this major omnibus bill that the Liberals are using all procedural tools to push through, while they also rejected the vast majority of the over 400 amendments submitted by opposition members. In the process of issuing certificates, the Canadian Energy Regulator is tasked with establishing a commission and undertaking public consultation. At committee, one of my amendments was adopted, which requires the commissions to make public any reasons for holding a hearing about the consideration of issuing a certificate. But there still remains uncertainty around the assessment and Bill C-69 opens foreign influence in these public hearings. Bill C-69 does enable increased foreign influence on Canadian resource development decisions because of the removal of the previous standing test, which ensured interveners in the process either were impacted directly by the project under review or had specific knowledge or expertise that would contribute to the assessment. Some claim that foreign groups have always been allowed to participate in Canada's environmental assessment processes, but that's just not true either. This has only rightfully been the case for projects that cross international borders. Canada has never permitted foreign interference in the environmental assessment process for interprovincial pipelines or other resource projects in federal jurisdiction that do not cross international borders. But the removal of the standing test now opens this process up to groups who are either directly or indirectly backed by foreign dollars or by Canada's competitors. The Canadian Energy Pipeline Association warned, quote, "There are recent examples in Canada where the absence of a standing requirement has led to highly inappropriate participation that had no probative value with respect to the issues to be decided in the review, and that the elimination of the standing requirement could, quote, be used to clog the hearing process in an attempt to delay projects to the point that they are abandoned." Foreign interference in Canadian resources is already growing to the detriment of all of Canada. Millions in foreign money is funding opposition to the Trans Mountain expansion. It was used to challenge Canadian LNG development opportunities too, and is growing as a barrier to Canadian mining. The Financial Post recently revealed Tides has granted $40 million to 100 Canadian anti-pipeline organizations that, in return, fight to stop Canadian energy development and access to export markets, disadvantaging Canada against the U.S., its most significant energy competitor and primary energy customer. Foreign funds are interfering in and influencing electoral outcomes in Canada, too. A report to Elections Canada and Senator Frum have highlighted foreign funding funneled to third-party groups like the Dogwood Initiative and Lead Now to defeat incumbent Conservative MPs in certain ridings in the 2015 election and to fight Canadian resource development. I support Senator Frum's Bill S-239 that will define foreign contributors, add classifications of foreign contributions, and make it an offense for any third party to accept foreign dollars for, quote, any purposes related to an election. But the Prime Minister, he defends using Canadian tax dollars to fund jobs specifically for activists to stop the approved Trans Mountain expansion. And he is resisting Conservatives' calls to ban foreign funding in Canada's elections too, which makes the case that he seems to welcome foreign influences to deliver on his stated objective of phasing out Canadian energy. Bill C-69 puts Canada's economic future at risk. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers warns C-69 harms Canada's reputation as a transparent, stable, predictable, and fair place to do business, and that risks Canada's ability to be a supplier of choice for world demand of responsible energy in the future. Suncor's CEO warns, quote, "Canada needs to up its game to attract investment and to compete with the United States. Instead of upping its game, Bill C-69 is the equivalent of the Liberals folding Canada's hand." The Canadian Energy Pipeline Association warns C-69 will damage Canada's reputation as a priority choice for energy investment and said, quote, "It is difficult to imagine that a new major pipeline could be built in Canada under the Impact Assessment Act, much less attract energy investment to Canada." Investment in oil and gas is projected to drop 12% this year from 2017. And the Bank of Canada already says there will be no new energy investment in Canada after next year, 2019. In the last 2 years, at least 7 multinational companies have divested from Canada's energy sector completely, and many more have frozen existing operations or shelved future plans. CEPA's CEO says, quote, "Currently there is profound uncertainty in advancing new major pipeline projects. We now have a significant problem as a sector and as a country in accessing new markets for our products around the world. The development of new projects is grinding to a halt. CEPA member companies that have material assets in other countries are actively pursuing those opportunities because of the uncertainty and potential implications of further potentially seismic regulatory changes, C-69, that will directly impact the pipeline sector, and the sector is suffocating because of it. It's clear that Liberal red tape and uncertainty are already forcing investors and developers to seek out other markets, causing hundreds of thousands of Canadians to lose their jobs. And Bill C-69 will make it worse. This Prime Minister must stop sacrificing Canada's interests to the rest of the world. Canada already has the highest environmental standards in the world and the most responsibly produced oil and gas. Canada will continue to do so long into the future if only governments will allow energy and all responsible resource development to continue to fuel Canada's economy and contribute public revenue for all levels of government. Resource jobs are middle-class jobs. So if the Prime Minister truly cares about the middle class, he will stop increasing red tape and imposing policies that drive out investment and the hundreds of thousands of middle-class jobs in every corner of the country that go with it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.